Hello, beautiful people. It's a great day today. I join you live today with a mixed feeling. Positively, my country just won a game in the World Cup, and that's a cause to be happy for. Negatively, they didn't play too well, and since we are playing England next, I'm not so excited about that. But our class is very necessary and important, so no time to enjoy or celebrate. Now, today in class, we are going to discuss one of the oldest and most successful writers in the history of English literature, Charles Dickens. And he wrote quite a number of books. I might be on a series of discussing his books or his novels. But what we have on the chopping board today, the title is there is A Christmas Carol. Now, A Christmas Carol isn't a novel and isn't a short story. It's a novella. The difference between novella and novels are that novellas are not as long as novels. Their word count ranges between 20,000 to 50,000 words, and they focus on a single theme or conflict. They do not usually have subplots. Now, another unique thing about today's Christmas Carol novella is that Charles Dickens didn't write it in chapters like the traditional novels are done. He wrote them in staves. A stave basically is like a stanza in a poem, a group of lines. So we are going to look at a book that has been written in five staves. And what I will do is that I will discuss them in parts. So today will be or is the part one of this discussion. So in this part one, we are going to look at plot analysis of the first stave, and if possible, we add a second one, plot analysis. We'll look at character development. We'll look at themes or the main theme, symbols, narrative techniques, and what have you, any other necessary elements. We are going to combine them in today's class. Unlike the previous ones where I look at plot analysis, then I come back to look at the character. Today I'm going to do them in the stave. So every stave I take, I'm going to look at all these things, all clumps together in one. So without wasting much time, let's look at the first stave. And in the first stave, the main thing that happened there is Marley's ghost. Now, this novella opens by confirming that Jacob Marley, who happens to be Ebenezer Scrooge's former business partner, is dead. So that's the confirmation. That's why I named it Marley's Ghost, because the ghost actually did a lot of things that you know. Now, 7 years later, Scrooge or Ebenezer continues to operate their business alone. They were in partnership, but when he died, Ebenezer decided to operate it alone. Now, Ebenezer has been presented to us as an extremely worthy but a miser. He doesn't want to spend money. He's a miser, stingy, and he dislikes Christmas. He avoids human relationships and refuses to help the poor. Three key things about Ebenezer Scrooge is what I just mentioned. One, he dislikes Christmas because he doesn't want to spend money, even though he's rich or he was presented or he's presented as someone who is rich. Two, he avoids human relations or relationship altogether. And three, he refuses to help the poor. If you are part of the life, you can like, you can leave your comments, and you can follow the channel and make your channel visible so that I can follow you back. Okay, so on Christmas Eve, Scrooge, the stingy man, the miser, rejects his nephew Fred's invitation to dinner. He was invited to dinner by Fred, but he rejected it. He reluctantly allows his clerk Bob to take Christmas days off and refuses to donate money to charity. I mentioned these three things already. Now, later that evening, the Christmas Eve. Christmas Eve here simply means a day before Christmas, the evening to the day of Christmas. So, on the eve, later that evening, Marley's ghost appears in Struth's house. So, you understand why the title is Marley's Ghost. Now, Marley condemns to wander the world, carrying a heavy chain that he created through his selfish actions. That is Marley. He has been condemned. Okay, you are welcome. So I'm a Ghanaian, but I'm currently in Vietnam. All right, so we'll continue. If you have any other concerns, you can raise it and I'll respond to it for you. So Marley, when he was alive, is condemned to wander the world carrying a heavy chain that he created through his selfish action. So he wants through that he is following the same path and announces that three spirits will visit him. So Marley and Scrooge were business partners before Marley died. Now Marley is paying for his selfishness while he was alive, and his ghost has now visited his business partner to warn him. In English, we say for warned is for armed. So he's being warned. Now, let me quote this opening line and the certainty of that. It says that Marley was dead. Certainty. So it has been certified that Marley is dead. To begin with, so we know that Dicken immediately establishes death as a central concern in this novella. The narrator insists that Marley is unquestionably dead because the supernatural event that follows depends on this fact. You know, if you don't convince or accept that Marley is dead, you might not come to realization that the person that visited Scrooge or Ebenezer isn't Marley, but is rather his ghost. So this is how analysis goes. That's why I concluded that it is his ghost that visited Scrooge or Ebenezer. Now, the funny aspect or the humorous insistence on Marley's death also creates a mixture of consciousness and comedy because he insistently or consistently establishes the fact that Marley isn't alive, is dead. Now, this opening lines or this opening in the novella establishes the novella as a Gothic element. So, Gothic literature or Gothism is a type of literature that uses the supernatural, abandoned castles, and very common in those days in Italy. Now, so to add to some of the features of a Gothic literature or some of the Gothic elements in Gothism, you can talk about fear, you can talk about darkness, ghosts, and the rest. Now, London is presented as cold, dark, and foggy during the time of the novel. Now, this atmosphere reflects Scrooge's emotional condition and prepares the reader for Marley's ghost to arrive. I quote, squeezing, retching, grasping, scraping, clutching, old sinner. The fleet of verbs used here suggests physical violence and possession. Physical violence and possession. Scrooge does not simply own wealth, he holds onto it forcefully. You are aware of that? The list also makes him appear almost less than human or less human, as though every part of his personality is organized around acquiring and protecting wealth, acquiring and protecting money. And Charles Dickens put it rightly, hard and sharp as flint, quote and unquote. Flint is a hard stone that can produce sparks when strike or struck. So the comparison, the metaphor, communicates Struth's emotional hardness, but it also subtly suggests that warmth may still be produced from him. His character is difficult to change, but not impossible, because the rock or the flint might be hard, but it's capable of being destroyed. Now, this line confirms the fact that Charles Dickens is sending a message to we the readers that Ebenezer's or Struth's character might be difficult to change because he has lived it for long and is used to it, but not impossible. Solitary as an oyster. Now, an oyster is closed and protected by its shells. Now, this reflects Ebenezer's isolation from society. Just as the way the oyster is closed, the oyster is inside, protected by its shell. However, oysters may contain pearls, suggesting that something valuable remains hidden inside him. And also, oysters can be opened, also suggested that the character traits may be difficult to change, but it's not impossible you can change it. So here, Dickens introduces the possibility of redemption whilst presenting Ebenezer or Scrooge negatively. Now, there's another very key thing in step one that I want to talk about. That is coldness as a symbol. The cold within him froze his old features. Cold is not simply part of the winter setting. It originates within him, quote and unquote, within him, showing that his external appearance reflects his inner character or his internal characteristics. And this is very important. There's something I've always thought of, and sometimes I even want to post it on my social media handles, especially YouTube. Maybe after today's class, I'll post it there. That is mostly the best way to understand people's attitude is to understand their story. If you don't know their story, you cannot conclusively explain why they live the way they live. So back to the first step, his lack of generosity and affection makes him emotionally cold. So basically, Dickens develops a semantic field, so group of words connected by meaning. Of the words are of winter, frost, and darkness. Struth's office or Benezer's office is poorly heated because he refuses to spend money on coal. Bob, his secretary, attempts to warm himself with a candle, emphasizing the necessity or the unnecessary suffering created by Struth's stinginess. One key thing here is this: the contrast between cold and warm becomes morally significant through the novella. Cold represents isolation, greed, and emotional emptiness. Warmth represents family, generosity, belongingness, or human connection. Now, still in step one, let's analyze Struth's attitude towards Christmas. When Fred wishes him a Merry Christmas, Ebenezer I'm using the names interchangeably. Scrooge is the same character as Ebenezer. So his response to the wish is this: Bah, humbug. Humbug means fraud or nonsense. Scrooge believes Christmas generosity is dishonest and irrational. He sees the celebration only in financial terms, asking what reason Fred had to be merry when he is poor. So Christmas or the celebration of Christmas isn't necessary. But Fred offers the opposite perspective. He describes Christmas as a kind, forgiving, charitable, and pleasant time. A time for people to show love and kindness, to forgive those who offended them, to give up freely and have pleasures. And these are things that Scrooge or Ebenezer doesn't believe in. So even though Fred recognizes Christmas as something that has value beyond money, it encourages people to treat others as human beings. But this Scrooge rejects, absolutely rejected it, completely rejects it. Fred, even though he's poor, it did not prevent him from being happy. Scrooge, even though he's rich, does not or did not prevent him from being miserable. So you realize that there's a great contrast here. The rich still remained miserable during Christmas and the poor was happy. Now, what can you learn from this part? Through this contrast, Dickens or Charles Dickens challenges the assumption that money automatically produces fulfillment. So there's this popular belief or notion among a lot of people, including myself sometimes, that money brings happiness. But Dickens is challenging that with the contrast in the characters of Fred and Scrooge. Fred being poor but happy, Scrooge being worthy or rich but miserable. Now let's look at Scrooge's relationship towards the poor. And I quote, "Are there no prisons?" Unquote. Another quote, "and the union workhouses?" Unquote. So two great rhetorical questions. Here, Scrooge treats poverty as a problem that should be handled through institutions rather than personal responsibilities. If you are poor, you are a problem to the state or the nation or the community or the society you live in. Therefore, you should be handled by this institution. Workhouses were institutions where poor people received basic support under severe and humiliating conditions. They are like orphanages to the poor. Note, I'm not establishing that orphanages provide humiliating conditions. No, I'm looking at the free giving or taking care of people freely. Now, listen to this quote. If they would rather die, they had better do it and decrease the surplus population. This is what Ebenezer Scrooge said, and he is referring to the poor. The expression, quote and unquote, surplus population actually reduces human beings to numbers, humiliating human, reducing the value of human to mere numbers. Scrooge does not see poor people as individuals with families, no, or individuals with experiences, no, or individuals with emotions, no. His language reflects a form of utilitarian thinking. Utilitarian here means judging human value mainly through economic usefulness. If you are economically unuseful, then you are less of a human. But as the first stave progresses and was almost ending, Dickens forces Scrooge to confront the cruelty of this world when the ghost of Christmas presents the ghost of Christmas present, let me put it that way. The ghost of Christmas present repeats them in relation to Tiny Tim. Now, summing up or almost getting to the end of the first stave, let's look at Bob. Bob Cratchit. He is introduced as Scrooge's poorly paid clerk. Scrooge controls his access to heat and complains about giving him Christmas Day off. Now, Bob represents or symbolically represents the vulnerable working population. He works hard but remains poor because his wages are inadequate. And there are a lot of people within the working class that works hard but due to inadequate wages, they remain poor. This perception that poverty is caused by laziness has been challenged here because Bob isn't lazy but he's poor. Now, let's look at what Ebenezer thinks about holiday as a financial theft. He believes that giving people holidays is a financial theft, a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. That's what he thinks. It is an excuse of depriving him of his money. So he believes that the absence of Bob on 25th is stealing his money, his wages, because he has to work. Now, another thing that I want us to talk about is Marley's ghost that visited Scrooge that I mentioned earlier, and the chain that Marley carries. Now, Marley's ghost or Marley appears carrying a chain made from objects associated with business, cash boxes, keys, padlocks, ledgers, deep, heavy purses. Now, the chain symbolizes the consequences of Marley's choices, and he explains, I wear the chain I forged in life. I wear the chain I forged in life. The verb forged indicates that Marley created this punishment himself. Every selfish decision added another part to the chain. So his suffering after death is therefore not an arbitrary punishment, but the natural result of living without compensation or compassion. In other words, it is self-inflicted punishment for being selfish, emotionless. So Marley's ghost once told that his own chain was already as long and heavy as Marley's 7 years earlier. Scrooge's spiritual condition may therefore be even worse when he dies. That is the warning. Whatever he will go through might be worse when he dies. Now, don't forget these key things in this chapter. That is this stage. One, Scrooge is greedy and emotionally isolated. There's contrast between wealth and happiness, and whether poverty is caused by laziness or hard work is stated. Don't forget about the responsibility of society towards the poor. And finally, the consequences of being selfish. Good. Today's class is getting a bit longer, but I think it's necessary. So let's briefly look at step 2. Then tomorrow we can look at 3 and 4. The first of the three spirits. So in step 1, Marley warns Scrooge that he will be visited by 5 spirits. So the first of the three spirits, sorry. So the first of the three spirits, as a way of summarizing the plot, the ghost of Christmas past takes through scenes from his earlier life. Reminiscing, Stu sees himself as a lonely child at school. His loving sister, Fan, his apprenticeship under Fezziwig, his former fiancée, Belle, and Belle's later family. So, memory lane. That's why I mentioned reminiscing, going back into memory lane. These memories revealed that Scrooge was not always emotionally cold. They also show we the readers how loneliness, fear, and his increasing obsession with money contributed to his transformation. If you don't know the story of a man, don't try to tell his behavior, don't try to judge him. Hi, you're welcome to the channel. You can follow the channel, leave your comments, and I'll respond. If you make your channel visible, I'll follow you back immediately I end today's lesson. Okay, so one of the first things you should learn from step 2 is that what a man becomes. When I say man, I don't mean I'm not being gender biased here. No, what a man becomes is dependent on what the man went through. So before you judge the man and what he has become, get to know what he went through. Now, the ghost of Christmas past. This spirit has a contradictory appearance, like a child, yet not so like a child as like an old man, quote and unquote. He looks like a child, but he's not a child, he's an old man. Now here, the combination of youth and age reflects the nature of the memory. The past contains childhood experiences, but those experiences are viewed from the perspective of age. Then a bright light emerges from the spirit's head, and this light symbolizes truth, memory, and self-awareness or self-knowledge. The spirit forces truth to see aspects of his life that he has attempted to suppress. The spirit also carries an extinguisher-like cap. Scrooge eventually uses it to cover the spirit's light, symbolizing his desire to hide from painful truth. He doesn't want to live by the truth. He doesn't want to live with the truth, but rather he decides to hide from it by covering the light using the extinguisher. Now, let's progress and look at this. Scrooge as a lonely child. I quote, a solitary child. Solitary means loneliness. Neglected by his friends, is left there still. Solitary, as I explained. Connect the child with the adult described as solitary as an oyster that we looked at in step 1. However, the cause of the child's isolation is different. Young Scrooge is not alone because he rejects others. He has been rejected. People or others rather rejected him. Now, this memory complicates our judgment as readers because Dickens does not excuse adult Scrooge behavior, but he helps the readers understand its origin. He is not, Dickens is not suggesting us saying that how he's living is justifiable, but he wants us to understand how he came about that. Now let's look at regret and the carol singer. After seeing his lonely childhood, Ebenezer remembers the boy who had sung a Christmas carol outside his door earlier that evening. I quote, I should like to have given him something. That's all unquote. You know, when I read this place, I just smile and laugh. Someone is changing, I guess. Someone is going through transformation. The memory lane, the reminiscing, the flashback maybe might have helped up to this point. Now, there's a small regret, which is very significant because Ebenezer is beginning to connect his own childhood suffering with the suffering of another child. The memory creates empathy. I like that. Or sympathy, but this the best one is empathy by allowing him to recognize himself in someone else. Fun and family life, having fun, enjoying life, and living with family. Now, Scrooge has had a sister or has a sister called Fun who arrives to take him home. She is warm, she is affectionate, and she is protective. She tells him that their father has become kinder. Now, Fan, the sister, represents unconditional family love. She later becomes Fred's mother, explaining why Fred continues to invite Stu to Christmas dinner despite repeated rejection. So, family. Now, let's look at, there are a lot to look at, so let's just look at some key things. The golden idol. Scrooge sees the end of his engagement to Belle, his former fiancée or girlfriend. She tells him, I quote, another idol has displaced me, unquote. When Scrooge asks what idol she means, Belle answers, a golden one, quote and unquote. Golden one, money, has become an object of worship. Idol, which is a religious word for worship, suggests that Scrooge has replaced human love and moral values with wealth, money. Belle, his former girlfriend, recognizes his fear of poverty, and she knows that it has become stronger than his love for her. That's why she said that another idol has displaced me, a golden one. That's money, wealth. He initially sought financial security because he feared suffering, but this desire for security developed into greed. Now, I want you to note one thing. The distinction is very important here. What distinction am I referring to in this case? I'm referring to the distinction between Dickens' presentation of Scrooge's materialism, which is beginning in fear. However, you have to also understand fear does not justify the harm he later causes. So there's distinction. He started yearning to be rich because of fear of suffering. But this fear of suffering should not justify his actions or treatment of other people. Now let's look at some key things that you should